As a pilot flying a U-2, are you expected to be able to go and fly, I won't say against, because that's not really what you do, but go and fly close to, let's say, threat systems of one nation or another nation, or how does that work?
Well, we do, and we do have a tactics side at the 99th Reconnaissance Squadron. So they've got folks that work in the tactics side, and that both intel officers, intel enlisted, and the pilots that work in there, and they're that's their meat and potatoes, if you will. The subject matter experts to where we fly, the detachments that we have generally have they have a full-time commander, full-time ops officer, and in some of the cases now it's changed a lot in the last few years. We actually have usually one pilot that's a line pilot there full-time. So when you deploy over there, you'll get there, and the DO and the commander that have been there for 6, 7, 12 months, whatever it is, they're pretty up to speed on what's going on. And when you get there, you're going to walk in. They're going to say, "Here you go. Here's the binder. Read this cover to cover." And then they come. We'll sit down, and we're going to go through a lot of material. So the first few days you're in theater, while you're getting caught up on your, getting your sleep cycle caught up, you're spending a lot of time in the books and learning a lot. And then they'll sit down with you and basically talk you through the mission, what the threats are, whatever the specifics are to that particular location. And so I would say, at least from my experience, it's the commander and the operations officer that you'll see at the detachments that are the subject matter experts. And then back home, the folks that are over in the tactics shop, they do a great job of getting you spun up and ready to go.
So what were your first couple of years like then at Alconbury? You've already mentioned the mission being to provide intelligence on the Fulda Gap, that being a sort of part of Germany, a lowlands area where the Russian military were going to roll through if the balloon went up. What sort of missions were you flying? Was it exclusively to sort of photograph the Fulda Gap, or were you? Well, you already said you flew a longer mission. So, what other things were you up to?
It was primarily up and down the inter-German-Czech border. Back and forth. Somewhat like what we do in Korea now, except instead of flying east-west, we were flying north-south up and down the inter-German-Czech border. But again, when I got there, the wall was coming down, and but we still had the mission to fly, so it was fairly low threat, and we had a ground station in Germany that we used, and we would talk to the German air defense controllers, and doing our thing, and they were up and running. The wall was coming down, but the threats were still over there. We would still see the missile sites fire up every now and then. Light us, they would they'd illuminate us, and it was generally we document it, but no, it was a very, very low threat, very friendly situation, as you may remember back from the 1990-1991 time frame. So up and down the inter-German border was our meat and potatoes. As I mentioned, we did have another long-range mission, and right before I got there, we actually had a mission that we flew. That they flew. It was a 12-hour mission, and they would take up out of the UK and go down to the northern part of Africa. It was a pretty interesting mission. I never got to fly it. They terminated that right before I got there, but it sounded like quite a long mission. 6 hours down and 6 hours back, and you get back and you're out of gas. What else did we fly while I was out there? During when the Bosnian conflict came up, we started flying the missions out of there. We would take off and fly down south, turn the corner, come across northern Italy through just on the south side of the Alps, and then up and down the Adriatic. We did a lot of the missions out there. And then back in 1992, July 92, we deployed over to Aviano Air Base in Italy to get real close to the operations area out there. And that was when Aviano was quite the super base. And then later with the F-16 wing that they have out there, it turned into quite a very busy base, especially in 1999 during the war over there. They were flying combat missions, dropping a lot of bombs. When we got there, Alconbury was a sleepy little base, and it was there was the reserve unit, reserve or guard unit from Florida flying F-16s. They were on the way out. They'd actually just gotten hit by Hurricane Andrew, and they were packing up to go back to go see what was left of their houses. And there was a couple Italian Chinook helicopters, and that was really about it. It was a sleepy little base. We did a lot of the missions up and down the Baltic.
And this was, again, we're back with the sort of the steam gauges, the glass dials. No sort of information to you as the pilot as to what it was the sensors were seeing. So you Correct. Were sort of flying the route, and you wouldn't know until you got back whether or not you got the intelligence that you've been asked to.
On those missions, we had just started carrying the data link, so we did have it on board. And in fact, the mission, the deployment in July of 1992, that was the very first operational deployment of the what they call it the PEG now, Pylon Equipment Group, PEG. Back then we called it Senior Spur, but that was the very first. They actually had done it a couple deployments, prototype, but the very first operational deployment was in 1992. Aviano. And the missions we flew out of Alconbury, they were, because of the drive time down and the drive time back, they were a lot shorter, which is again why we deployed to Aviano, because we took off and you're right there in the orbit, getting 8 hours of collection every single time. I think we flew some of the camera missions out of Aviano. In fact, our ops officer was the flying U-2 out of Alconbury. Was the I remember it was I think he was out of Alconbury. Was when he was the guy that found the mass graves in Yugoslavia using a U-2 on a camera mission. And that was when I think it was Madeleine Albright showed those photos to the United Nations. And so again, the wet film camera, people forget, they think we've moved on to all the digital technology, but there's still some very, very good uses for the wet film camera.
I want to ask a question, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way. And this really relates to sort of the missions that you were flying back in those days, I suppose. You said something yesterday when we were talking about the interview process and how some guys sort of don't stick around and others stick around. And one of the questions you said that they might ask is, how do you stay alert? How do you stay awake? How do you stay sort of focused on these long missions? And I'm thinking sort of back in those days then, where as a pilot, you didn't necessarily know, you couldn't see what your sensors were doing. I guess you turned them on and you knew your times, you knew where you were doing your job. Was it boring?
Oh, there's certainly times when it's boring, but I stay pretty busy in the cockpit. I work really hard to keep track of, especially in the op area, of making sure the aircraft is exactly where it needs to be. What's my divert location? If the engine quits, what am I going to do next? And that information is changing, every 15 minutes, what my divert location could potentially be. So I stay pretty busy. I'm monitoring my fuel. I do a fuel ladder. I basically graphing the fuel down there and check to make sure that the fuel burn's going down the way it should. Or actually, our fuel burn, we may start at X number of gallons per hour, and the next hour it's a little bit less as we go lighter and higher and so on. I would get into the fuel charts before I flew and see how the aircraft's fuel burn had been before. I'll compare that to make sure the aircraft's burning the same amount of fuel, nothing's going on that shouldn't be happening. Checking the accuracy of the navigation system. So I stay pretty busy in the aircraft, and I would say probably a lot of the folks do. When we're ferrying the aircraft across the Atlantic or across the Pacific, just ferrying the aircraft, not much going on. There's no sensors on the aircraft. You're just ferrying the aircraft, moving it around, and frankly, it's pretty laid back. And you could find it boring, but I find myself just enjoying the view and having time to sit back and just enjoy flying the aircraft on the ferry flight. And the last ferry flight I did was in January of 2014, and I flew the aircraft out of Fairford back to the U.S. And it was a 12.1 hour flight, and the first half of the flight was just terrific. And I'm flying across Greenland. I'm just got my phone out, taking pictures of everything, and just a magnificent view. And then I literally at the halfway point, I had a significant pressurization issue on the aircraft, and I spent the rest of the time working the pressurization issue, talking to a civilian ham radio operators on the ground that were relaying me back to Beale, and it was on a weekend to track the guys down to help me out with some ideas on that and backing me up in the checklist. So then the next 6 hours goes by fairly quickly because you're just constantly trying to communicate with everything. Next thing you know, it's like, wow, I'm already finished going through Canada. I'm entering into the United States airspace. I'll be home in an hour and a half. So depending on what's going on, there's not a whole lot of time to get bored. But I again, if I'm sitting in the U-2 looking around, going, nothing's going on, I probably need to focus on what is going on, because there's a lot happening. And just so the aircraft, so it stays boring, you got to work pretty hard.
Does that suggest that it's suited to a particular sort of personality then, sort of who's fastidious, sort of, where attention to detail is king? Not to suggest that you can't, professional aviators have all those qualities. I'm not suggesting that there are, well, I guess they won't survive very long if they don't have some of those qualities, but.
No, I don't think anything, I don't know. I don't think there's anything greater about it than in those professional qualities than anybody else. I really just think it's just a matter of personality, what you enjoy. Some people, I know people that have gone and considered, done the fighter thing and said, I don't want to fly fighters. I know people that have flown heavies, that did the fighter did the fighter exchange, and oh man, it was the best thing I ever did in my life, goes to go fly fighters. So I think it's a personality thing. Some people would love it and some people would hate it. And that's the beauty of the interview process, I think, it's one of the very few assignments that the average Air Force pilot, he or she can go, you know what, I want to kind of build my own destiny. I want to go try this out. Mother Air Force isn't saying, hey, here's the next assignment you're going to go to. If you can get released, you can say, I want to go check this out and see this is something I want to try. And if it works for somebody and they jump into it, great. And if it doesn't, they can see it and they can walk away. And I would tell every person that came through that I interact with when they interview, I would tell them the exact same thing. I said, it's really easy to get out here and go, wow, this is different. It's a great group of people. I mean, it is a great group of folks. We're kind of our own little niche community. It's a really cool airplane. Nobody ever really gets to see. Very unique mission. The black T-38s, you get to fly those in the side. So it's very easy to get all caught up in all this newness and wow. I said, but be very, very careful. This is not for everybody. I said, remember, you are interviewing us and you can walk away anytime. You've got that airline ticket in your hand. You can walk away anytime. And I'll tell them also, if you jump into this program and you don't really do the interview process, due diligence, a year or 2 years from now, and you find yourself miserable going, I do not know why I came here. I should have never done it. You have nobody to blame but yourself. The Air Force did not force you to go do this. You volunteered for it. So you're going to have to suck it up.
If you enjoyed this clip and want more, you can go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe, you get early ad-free access to all my content. Appreciate your support.